1221. The Spirit. The realm of the spirit is tremendously large. There is an endless amount of the spiritual. Still, let's see what the spirit, this legacy from the ancients, really is. It emerged from their birth pangs, but they could not express themselves as spirit. They could give birth to it, but it had to express itself. The born God, the Son of Man, first spoke the word that spirit, i.e. he, the God, has nothing to do with earthly things and earthly relationships, but only with the spirit and spiritual relationships. Is my courage, indestructible under all the world's blows, my inflexibility and defiance, already spirit in the full sense, since the world cannot touch it? In this way, it would simply be at enmity with the world, and its activity would be limited to not being defeated by it. No, so long as it is not dealing with itself alone, so long as it does not have to do only with its own world, the spiritual, it is not free spirit, but only the spirit of this world, the one fettered to it. The spirit is free spirit, i.e. actual spirit, only in a world of its own. In this one, the earthly world, it is a stranger. Only in the midst of a spiritual world is the spirit actually spirit, because this world doesn't understand it, and doesn't know how to keep the girl from the foreign land from leaving. But where is this spiritual world supposed to come from? Nowhere else but from itself. It must reveal itself and the words that it speaks, the revelations in which it unveils itself, these are its world. As a dreamer lives and has his word only in the fanciful patterns that he himself creates, as a fool generates his own dream world, without which he wouldn't even be able to be a fool, so spirit has to create its spirit world for itself, and, until it creates this, is no spirit. Thus its creations make it spirit, and in its creations, one recognizes it the creator. It lives in them, they are its world. Now, what is the spirit? It is the creator of the spiritual world. Also in you and me, one first recognizes spirit when he sees that we have appropriated something spiritual to ourselves, for example, thoughts. Although they were perhaps presented to us, we have nonetheless brought them to life in ourselves. Since as long as we were children, one could have presented us with the most edifying thoughts without our wanting or being able to recreate them in ourselves. So also the spirit only exists when it creates the spiritual. It is only actual together with the spiritual, its creation. Since we recognize it because of its works, the question is this: what are these works? But the works or children of the spirit are nothing other than spirits. If I had Jews before me, Jews of true metal, I would have to stop here and leave them standing before this mystery as they have remained standing before it, unbelieving and without knowledge, for almost 2,000 years. But since you, my reader, are at least not a full-blooded Jew, for such one wouldn't go this far astray, we'll go a little bit further together until you too perhaps turn your back on me, because I'm laughing in your face. If someone told you that you were Holy Spirit, you would take hold of your body and not believe him, but would answer, I probably have spirit, but I don't exist only as spirit, but rather as a human being with a body. You would still distinguish yourself from your spirit. But, he replies, it is your destiny to one day become a blessed spirit, even if now you still go along to the shackles of the body. And however you may imagine the future appearance of this spirit of yours, this much is still certain, that you will take off your body in death and nonetheless keep yourself, i.e., your spirit, for all eternity. Therefore, the spirit is what is eternal and true in you, and the body is only an earthly home, which you can leave and perhaps exchange for another. Now you believe him. For the present, indeed, you are not just spirit, but one day, when you have to leave your mortal body, then you'll have to make do without a body. And this is why it is necessary that you take care and provide for your true I in time. What would it profit a man if he gained the whole world, but lost his soul? Footnote 11, Matthew 16:26. But even granting that the doubts raised over the years against the Christian beliefs have long since robbed you of your belief in the immortality of your spirit, you have still left one tenet unshaken, and you still cling without inhibitions to the one truth, that the spirit is your better part, and that the spiritual has greater claims on you than anything else. Despite your atheism, you come together with the believers in immortality in your zeal against egoism. But whom do you imagine under the name of egoist? A human being who, instead of living an idea, i.e. a spiritual thing, and sacrificing his personal advantage to it, serves the latter? A good patriot, for example, brings his sacrifice to the altar of the fatherland, but it cannot be disputed that the fatherland is an idea, since for animals with no capacity for mind, or children who are still mindless, there is no fatherland and no patriotism. Now, if someone who does not prove himself to be a good patriot, he betrays his egoism in relation to the fatherland. And so it goes in countless other cases. Whoever makes use of a privilege in human society sins egoistically against the idea of equality. Whoever exercises dominance is chastised as an egoist against the idea of freedom, etc. So you despise the egoist because he neglects the spiritual in favor of the personal, and looks after himself, whereas you would like to see him act from love for an idea. You differ from him in that you make the spirit, whereas he makes himself, the central point, or in that you divide your I in two, and raise up your true I, the spirit, as the master of the worthless remainder, whereas he wants to know nothing of this division and pursues spiritual and material interests just as it gives him pleasure. Indeed, you think that you are striking out only against those who have no spiritual interest at all, but in fact you curse at everyone who doesn't see the spiritual interest as his true and highest interest. You carry your nightly service for this beauty so far as to claim that she is the only beauty in the world. You don't live for yourself, but for your spirit and what is the spirit's, i.e., ideas. Since the spirit only creates the spiritual, let's look around us for its creation. If it has first accompanied this, from then on a natural reproduction of creations follows, as according to the myth, only the first human beings had to be created so that the rest of the race could reproduce itself. However, the first creation must arise out of nothing, i.e., the spirit has nothing but itself for its realization, or rather, it doesn't have itself yet, but must create itself. Its first creation is thus itself, the spirit. As mystical as this sounds, we nonetheless go through it as an everyday experience. Are you a thinking being before you think? When you create the first thought, you create yourself, the thinking being, because you don't think before you think a thought, i.e. have a thought. Isn't it your singing that makes you a singer, your speaking that makes you a speaking human? Now, so too, it is the producing of the spiritual that first makes you a spirit. Meanwhile, as you distinguish yourself from the thinker, singer, and speaker, you no less distinguish yourself from the spirit and very much feel that you are something other than spirit. But just as, in the thinking eye, hearing and sight easily fade into the enthusiasm of thought, so spirit enthusiasm has seized you, and now you long with all your might to become Holy Spirit and merge into spirit. The spirit is now your ideal, the unattained, the otherworldly. Spirit is the name of your God, and God is spirit. You are a fanatic against everything that is not spirit, and therefore you rail fanatically against yourself, and aren't rid of a non-spiritual remainder. Instead of saying, I am more than spirit, you contritely say, I am less than spirit, and I can only think about spirit, pure spirit, or the spirit that is nothing but spirit, and am not this. And since I am not this, it is another, it exists as another, whom I call God. It lies in nature of the thing that the spirit which is supposed to exist as pure spirit must be an otherworldly one, for since I am not it, it can only exist outside of me. Since a human being doesn't fully merge into spirit, then pure spirit, as such, can only be outside of human beings, beyond the human world, not earthly, but heavenly. Only from this conflict in which I and the spirit lie, only because I and the spirit are not names for one and the same thing, but different names for entirely different things, only because I am not spirit and spirit is not I, only from this does one get the completely tautological explanation for the need for the spirit to live in the other world, i.e., to be God. From this it also follows how thoroughly theological, i.e., based in the study of divinity, the liberation Feuerbach strives to give us is. Footnote 12. Ludwig Feuerbach, The Essence of Christianity, a second enlarged edition. In particular, he says that we had only misjudged our own essence and therefore looked for it in the other world, but now, when we see that God is only our human essence, we have to again recognize it as our own and take it back from the other world into this one. Feuerbach names the God who is spirit, our essence. Can we put up with this, that our essence is brought into opposition with us, and that we get split up into an essential and a non-essential I? Don't we move back again in this way into the unhappy misery of seeing ourselves exiled from ourselves? What do we gain, then, when for a change we install the divine that was outside us into ourselves? Are we that which is in us, as little as we are that which is outside us? I am as little my heart as I am my sweetheart, this other I of mine. Precisely because we are not the spirit that dwells in us, precisely for this reason we had to move it outside ourselves. It was not we. It did not come together as one with us, and therefore we could do nothing other than to think of it as existing outside of us, beyond us, in the other world. With the strength of desperation, Feuerbach grips the whole substance of Christianity, not to throw it away, no, to usurp it, to pull it, the long-awaited, ever-distant, with one last effort out of its heaven, and keep it with him forever. Isn't that a grip of final desperation, a life-or-death grip? Isn't it, at the same time, the Christian longing and desire for the other world? The hero doesn't want to go into the other world, but rather to draw the other world into himself, and force it to become this world. And since then, doesn't all the world cry with more or less consciousness that this world is what matters, and heaven must come down to earth and be experienced here? We will briefly set Feuerbach's theological view and our contradiction over against each other. The essence of the human being is humanity's highest essence. Now, of course, for religion, the highest essence is named God and is looked upon as an objective essence. But in truth, it is only humanity's own essence, and therefore the turning point of world history is that from now on, God should no longer appear to the human being as God, but rather the human being should appear as God. Footnote 13, see, for example, The Essence of Christianity, page 402. To this we reply, the highest essence may be the human essence, but precisely because it is his essence, and not he himself, it doesn't matter at all whether we see it outside him and view it as God, or find it in him and call it human essence or the human being. I am neither God nor the human being, neither the highest essence nor my essence, and so, on the whole, it doesn't matter whether I think the essence is in me or outside of me. Indeed, we actually always think of the highest essence in both kinds of otherworldliness, the inner and the outer, as the same time, because God's spirit in the Christian view is also our spirit, and dwells within us. Footnote 14, for example, Romans 8:9, 1 Corinthians 3:16, John 20:22, innumerable other passa. It dwells in heaven and dwells in us. We poor things are just its dwelling, and if Feuerbach destroys its heavenly dwelling and forces it to move lock, stock, and barrel into us, then we, its earthly lodgings, will be very much overcrowded. But after this digression, which we meant it all to go like clockwork, we would have had to save for other, later pages to avoid repetition, we return to the Spirit's first creation, the Spirit itself. The Spirit is something other than I. But this I, what is it? One, two, two, two. The Possessed. Have you ever seen a spirit? No, not I, but my grandmother. You see, it's the same with me too. I myself haven't seen any, but they ran every which way between my grandmother's feet, and from trust in our grandmother's honesty, we believe in the existence of spirits. But didn't we have grandfathers, and didn't they shrug their shoulders every time our grandmothers talked about their ghosts? Yes, those were unbelieving men who have damaged our good religion, those Enlightenment philosophers. We'll feel that. What would form the basis then for this warm belief in ghosts, if not the faith in the existence of a spiritual essence in general? And isn't the latter itself disastrously shaken when one allows insolent rationalists to rattle the former? The Romantics thoroughly felt the blow that very belief in God suffered by the denial of the belief in spirits or ghosts, and sought to remedy the disastrous consequences not only through their reawakened fairy world, but finally, and particularly, through the intrusion of a higher world, through their somnambulists, visionaries of Provost, etc. The good believers and church fathers did not believe that along with the belief in ghosts, religion would be deprived of its basis, and that since then it has been floating in the air. One who no longer believes in ghosts only needs to follow through consistently in this unbelief to see that there is no separate essence at all behind things, no ghost, or, what is naively considered, synonymous in our use of words, no spirit. Spirits exist. Look around in the world and tell yourself whether a spirit doesn't look at you out of everything. From the lovely little flower speaks the voice of the Creator, who has formed it so wonderfully. The stars proclaim the spirit who has placed them in order. The spirit of grandeur blows down from the mountaintops. A spirit of longing rushes up from the waters, and from human beings millions of spirits speak. The mountains may cave in, the flowers wither, the world of stars collapse, the human beings die. What does the downfall of these visible bodies matter? The spirit, the invisible spirit, remains eternally. The whole world is haunted. Only is haunted? No, it itself haunts. It is eerie through and through. It is the changing apparent body of a spirit. It is a phantasm. What else is a ghost but an apparent body, but an actual spirit? Now the world is vain, it's empty, it's only dazzling appearance. Its truth is solely the spirit, it is the apparent body of a spirit. Look around near or far. A ghostly world surrounds you everywhere. You always have apparitions or visions. Everything that appears to you as only the appearance of an indwelling spirit is a ghostly phenomenon. The world is to you only a phenomenal world, behind which the spirit moves its essence. You, quote, see spirits. Are you perhaps thinking of comparing yourself to the ancients who saw gods everywhere? Gods, my dear modern, are not spirits. Gods do not reduce the world to an appearance and do not spiritualize it. But to you, the whole world is spiritualized and has become a mysterious ghost, so don't be surprised if you also find nothing but a phantasm in yourself. Doesn't your spirit haunt your body, and isn't the former alone the true and the real, the latter only the transitory and empty or appearance? Aren't we all ghosts, eerie essences who await deliverance? That is to say, spirits? Since the Spirit appeared in the world, since the Word became flesh, since then, the world has only been spiritualized, enchanted, a phantasm. You have spirits because you have thoughts. What are your thoughts? Spiritual essences. And so not things. No, but the spirit of things, the main point of all things, their innermost aspect, their idea. So what you think is not just your thought? On the contrary, it is the most real aspect, but is what is really true in the world. It is the truth itself. If I only truly think, I think the truth. Of course, I can be mistaken about the truth and fail to recognize it, but when I recognize it, then the object of my knowledge is the truth. So do you strive at all times to recognize the truth? The truth is sacred to me. It may well happen that I find a truth imperfect and replace it with a better one, but I cannot abandon the truth. I believe in the truth, therefore I search into it. Nothing surpasses it. It is eternal. The truth is sacred, eternal. It is the sacred, the eternal. But you who let yourself be filled and led by this sacred thing, yourself become sanctified. Also, the sacred is not for your senses, and you never as a sensual being discover its trace, but rather through your faith, or more particularly still, through your spirit, because it itself a spiritual thing, a spirit, it is spirit, through the spirit. The sacred in no way allows itself to be as easily gotten rid of as many who no longer take this unseemly word into their mouths presently claim. If even in a single respect I get scolded as an egoist, then the thought remains of another that I am supposed to serve more than myself, and which must be more important to me than everything. In short, something in which I would have to seek my true well-being, something sacred. If this sacred thing appears human, if it is the human itself, this does not take away its sacredness, but rather, at most, changes it from an unearthly to an earthly sacred thing, from a divine to a human one. Sacred things exist only for the egoist who doesn't recognize himself, the involuntary egoist, for the one who is always out for his own and yet does not consider himself the highest essence, who only serves himself and at the same time always thinks of serving a higher being, who knows nothing higher than himself and yet is crazy about something higher. In short, for the egoist who doesn't want to be an egoist and degrades himself, i.e. fights his egoism, but at the same time degrades himself so that he can be exalted and thus gratify his egoism. Because he wants to stop being an egoist, he looks about in heaven and earth for higher beings that he can serve and sacrifice himself to. But however much he shakes and chastises himself, in the end, he does everything for his own sake. And the disreputable egoism never gives way in him. This is why I call him the involuntary egoist. His effort and care to get away from himself are nothing but the misunderstood drive for self-dissolution. If you are bound to your last hour, if you must babble today because you babbled yesterday, if you can't transform yourself in every instant, you feel yourself in slave's shackles and frozen. This is why, beyond each moment of your existence, a fresh moment of the future beckons to you, and developing yourself, you get away from yourself, i.e. from your current self. As you are in each moment, you are your own creation, and now in this creation, you don't want to lose yourself, the creator. You are yourself a higher essence than you are, and you outdo yourself, but that you are the one who is higher than you, i.e. that you are not mere creation, but likewise your own creator. This you fail to recognize as an involuntary egoist. And so, the higher essence is for you an alien thing. Every higher essence, like truth, like humanity, etc., is an essence over us. Alienation is a hallmark of the sacred. In everything sacred, there is something eerie, i.e. alien, in which we are not quite familiar and at home. What is sacred to me is not my own, and if the property of others, for example, were not sacred to me, I would look upon it as mine and would take it for myself when a good opportunity arose. Or on the other hand, if the Chinese emperor's face was sacred to me, it would remain alien to my eyes and I would close them at its appearance. Why is an irrefutable mathematical truth, which might even be called eternal to the ordinary sense of the word, not sacred? Because it is not revealed, or it is not in the revelation of a higher essence. When one only understands so-called religious truths as revealed, one goes very wrong, and completely underestimates the breadth of the concept, higher essence. The atheists carry on their mockery of the higher essence, which also gets worshipped under the name of the highest, or être supreme, and trample one proof of its existence after another into the dust, without noticing that, out of a need for a higher existence, they only destroy the old one to make room for a new one. Isn't the human being a higher essence than an individual human being, and aren't the truths, rights, and ideas that arise from the concept of it supposed to be revered as revelations of this concept and held as sacred? Because if one were to again abolish some truth that seemed to be manifested by this concept, this would only give evidence of a misunderstanding on our part, without in the least doing harm to the sacred concept itself or taking its sacredness from the truths that must rightly be seen as revelations of the same. The human being reaches beyond each individual human being, and though it is his essence, it is in fact not his essence, which would instead be as unique as he, the individual himself, but rather a universal and higher, indeed for the atheists, the highest essence. And as divine revelations were not written down by God's own hand, but revealed through the Lord's tools, so also the newest highest essence doesn't write out its revelations itself, but lets the news reach us through true human beings. Only the new essence, in fact, betrays itself as a more spiritual conception than the old God, because the latter was still pictured with a kind of full-bodiedness or form, whereas the new has retained an unclouded spirituality, and no special material body is attributed to it. Still, it does not lack embodiment, which even becomes still more seductive, because it looks more natural and worldly, and consists in nothing less than every bodily human being, or simply in humanity or all people. Thus, the phantasmicality of the spirit in an apparent body has become quite solid and popular once again. So the highest essence is holy along with everything in which this highest essence reveals or will reveal itself. But those who recognize this highest essence together with its own, i.e. with the revelations of itself, are sanctified. The sacred in turn sanctifies its worshipper, who through worship becomes a sacred being himself, as likewise what he does is sacred, a sacred transformation, sacred thoughts and actions, writings and aspirations, etc. The conflict over what is worshipped as the highest essence can only be understood as meaningful, so long as the most embittered opponents concede to each other the main point, that there is a highest essence to which worship or service is due. If one smiles compassionately at the whole struggle over a highest essence, like a Christian, for example, all the war of words between a Shite or a Sunni or a Brahmin and a Buddhist, then the hypothesis of a highest essence is empty for him, and the conflict over it an idle game. So whether the one or the triune God, whether the Lutheran God or the Etre Supreme, or no God at all, but rather the human being, may signify the highest essence. This makes no difference at all to the one who denies the highest essence itself, because in his eyes those servants of the highest essence are altogether pious people. The fiercest atheist no less than the most devout Christian. So, in the foremost place in the sacred stands the highest essence and the belief in this essence, our holy faith.